As it turns out, American big tech is untouchable only in the US. In other parts of the world, it is being challenged. It is facing more regulation and in some cases being asked to cough up hefty fines. Take Google, for instance. South Korea slapped a $32 million fine on Google, and now Europe is imposing stricter rules. These rules will apply to 19 tech giants. They will face more scrutiny. Which are these companies? What did they do to invite such measures? And does this set a template for the rest of the world to follow? Our next report has the answers. Being a big tech company may be a badge of honor in the United States. But around the world, it's turning into a liability. Take the European Union, for example. It has identified 19 very big companies. The EU says that these companies are so big that they have an added responsibility. Responsibility for what? For making the internet safer. The European Union has rolled out some big online content rules. They're collectively known as the Digital Services Act. Here's what the rules broadly stipulate. Companies must undertake risk management. They must conduct external and internal auditing. They will also have to share data with relevant authorities and researchers and adopt a code of conduct by August this year. That's not all. These companies will also be asked to do a lot more to tackle disinformation. They'll have to protect users and give them more choices, and also ensure stronger protection for children. Given the track record of big tech companies, they may try to wiggle their way out of these rules. But non-compliance may attract major fines. We are talking about fines as high as 6% of their global turnover. So which companies are in the dock? The biggest of the lot. The likes of Google, Apple, Amazon, Meta, Twitter, TikTok, Alibaba, Wikipedia, Microsoft, and Snapchat. The European Commissioner for Internet Market made a point to single out Facebook. Thierry Breton said, and I quote, "Now that Facebook has been designated as a very large online platform, Meta needs to carefully investigate the system and fix it where needed ASAP." Twitter and TikTok will also be put through a test, a stress test, if you want to be dramatic about it. They'll be put under intense testing, and how they perform under stress will determine the stability of their systems. The European Union has a love-hate relationship with big tech. Europe needs these companies as much as the rest of the world does, but it also wants to make sure that these companies abide by European laws. It has slapped hefty fines on the likes of Google and Apple. American tech giants have been accused of tax evasion, stifling competition, using unfair means, and also spreading misinformation. In July last year, the European Parliament rolled out the Digital Markets Act. Its goal is to curb the market dominance of big tech companies and make the digital world a level playing field for all. Companies found violating the act would be fined up to 10% of their global revenue. In 2017, Google was fined 2.4 billion euros. The next year, it was slapped with a 4.3 billion euro fine, and then in 2019, it had another 1.5 billion euro fine. All these fines were imposed because Google was found abusing its dominant market position to kill competition. For all its faults, the EU is indeed waging a spirited fight against big tech. And that's a lesson for the world. Big tech companies can be taken to task. They just need to be given the right motivation, which, in the case of the EU, is the promise of billions of dollars in fines. In Europe, two countries are sparring over a rocket. Sweden launched a research rocket. It was supposed to conduct research for the Swedish Space Corporation, which means it was meant to stay in space. But it couldn't quite hold itself there. It came down pretty hard. Sweden planned for it to land back on its territory. That didn't work out either. Instead, the rocket crash-landed in Norway. And now Norway is calling the crash a quote-unquote border violation. It's pretty furious. After all, the rocket could have caused a lot of damage. But why was Norway caught off guard? And what does it say about Sweden's space program? Our next report tells you more.
Sweden was feeling ambitious on Monday. It launched a research rocket from the Esrange Space Center. The rocket was carrying out experiments at an altitude of 250 kilometers, experiments in zero gravity. But the rocket didn't last in zero gravity for a long time. It malfunctioned and came roaring down, hitting Norway. It crashed into a mountainside in Norway's far north. Fortunately, the closest inhabited area was about 10 kilometers away from the crash site, so no injuries or material damage has been reported. But this hasn't stopped Norway from lashing out at its neighbor. Norway's foreign ministry has made a big claim. It says the country was not informed about either the rocket's landing or the recovery of its payload. In a statement, Norway's foreign ministry said, "When such a border violation occurs, it's crucial that those responsible immediately inform the relevant Norwegian authorities through the proper channels." Notice how Norway has called the incident a border violation. Even if it was an accident, Norway has made it a point everyone knows that its borders were violated. Not by a Russian missile or rocket, not by a stray Ukrainian projectile, but by a rocket fired by Sweden. And that's not where Norway stopped. It also said, the crash of a rocket like this is a very serious incident that can cause serious damage. Serious damage to whom? To Norway and its people? Or to the relations between Sweden and Norway? Meanwhile, the primary scientific instrument on the rocket has been recovered. It's back in Sweden. Esrange, which launched the rocket into space, is embarrassed. It said, and I quote, "This is a deviation that we take seriously." Deviation, they say. Norway has termed it unauthorized activity. Its primary complaint with Sweden is that it wasn't informed about the launch, that it wasn't even told about the imminent crash on time. It only learnt about the crash after Sweden put out a press release on Monday, and that's not standard practice. The incident is not good news for Sweden or its space corporation. The European Space Agency has some big plans. So do some space startups. They want to use Sweden's Esrange launch site for high-stakes tests. But accidents like these could mean the loss of crucial space business for Sweden. Of course, space exploration was never easy. It comes with a host of complications, which is why Sweden isn't the only country making headlines today. Japan is in the same boat too. Tokyo-based iSpace wanted to become the first company to place a lander on the moon intact, but its mission has ended in failure. iSpace lost contact with the lander. It now believes that the spacecraft crashed into the moon's surface. So space is a tricky area, and communication among countries and space agencies when something goes wrong is key. Norway says Sweden did nothing of that sort on Monday.
It's the rematch nobody wanted. Joe Biden versus Donald Trump. President Biden announced his re-election bid on Tuesday. His big message? The battle for the soul of America is not complete, he says. Full marks for drama, but past experience tells us one thing. You resort to drama when you have no substance. Biden's campaign video talks a lot about decency, honesty, and respect. Listen to this.
The question we're facing is whether in the years ahead we have more freedom or less freedom, more rights or fewer. I know what I want the answer to be, and I think you do too. This is not a time to be complacent. That's why I'm running for re-election. Because I know America. I know we're good and decent people. I know we're still a country that believes in honesty and respect and treating each other with dignity.
Talk about an oversell. Biden's path to the nomination is easy. Sitting presidents do not face much opposition from within the party. So the question is, who will challenge him? Who will the Republican Party nominate? From the looks of it, it will be Donald Trump. He announced his candidacy in November last year, and if he wins, it will be a record of sorts. Only one US president has served 2 non-consecutive terms in America. And this was way back in 1893. Since then, presidents usually do 2 things. They either lose and retire, or they serve 2 consecutive terms and then retire. But then Trump is not your normal president. He isn't campaigning for the soul of America. He's campaigning with a vengeance. We'll get to Trump later. First, let's talk about Biden's chances. He's 80 years old now. He will be 86 by the time his second term ends, if he wins, that is. Now, I'm not big on ageism, but I will say this. The average retirement age in America is 62 years. Teachers retire by 62. Doctors retire by 62. Cops and firemen retire by 62. So should the man with the nuclear codes work till 86? Well, that's for the Americans to decide. Biden has had moderate success in his first term in office. He got some big spending bills passed, like the $1 trillion infrastructure package and the $50 billion chip industry package. The downside of that? Higher inflation. Biden presided over the highest US inflation in 4 decades. It has eased now, but people remember the pain. On foreign policy, he's had a mixed bag. Afghanistan and Ukraine have been disasters, but on Ukraine, he partially salvaged the situation. How? By expanding NATO into the Nordic. Finland has already joined, and Sweden will follow. But some big promises have been forgotten, like the Iran nuclear deal. Biden promised to revive it, but so far, he's not been able to. Under Biden, the US has lost even more strategic space in West Asia. China ended up brokering a deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia. It was unthinkable a few years ago. But Biden's biggest problem is not policy, because let's face it, which president has wowed the world with his policies? Biden's biggest problem is the lack of excitement. You see, Trump has a clear rallying call, make America great again. He's the victim, and Biden is the deep state. The recent indictment has also played into that narrative. Compare that to Biden's slogan, battle for the soul of the nation. What does that even mean? It's good for a James Cameron movie, not so much for an 80-year-old's re-election campaign. Biden benefited in 2020 from a sense of hopelessness, because Democrats basically said anyone but Trump. But 3 years later, the dynamic is different. Trump has consolidated his base, but Biden has consistently lost his. His approval ratings are just 42%. Even among Democrats, it's only 74%. And don't get me wrong, Biden's shortcomings do not make Trump look any better. He was an erratic and bigoted leader. As journalists, we don't miss his 3 a.m. tweets about nuking North Korea. My point is this: both these men appear unqualified, and Americans agree. A recent poll found that 2/3 of all Americans do not want Biden or Trump. They do not want a 2020 rematch. That tells you a lot about America's political system. Their leaders keep talking about diversity, about how America is a melting pot of cultures, how the American dream is the ultimate dream, yet every 4 years it comes down to the same thing: 2 old white men fighting for the White House. Where is the diversity? Where are the new ideas? Biden will tell you that Trump and right-wing extremism is a threat to US democracy, and he's right. But guess what else is? Billionaire donors and so-called philanthropists putting 80-year-old men in the White House. Email exchanges from inside the BBC, they talk about the risk of violating Indian laws. It's easier to rake up the freedom of speech debate, but does it give anyone a free pass to knowingly violate the law? America supports India because it needs India's support in return. And India is working with the US because it suits India's interests. This is how geopolitics works. Last night, he diffused a crisis with his defense minister. But today, Netanyahu was confronted with a new problem. His cabinet seems to have rebelled against him. The UK is looking at the Indian subcontinent to fill its coffers. That India seems to be negotiating from a position of power, like a partner and not a former colony. The US and Russia are dangerously close to an armed conflict. This year, 2023, New Delhi will be the capital of global diplomacy. For a country as diverse as ours, with 88% of the population illiterate, it was a very big deal to write a constitution, and that too, the world's largest. Meanwhile, if we may, here's a Republic Day gift from India for the BBC. A list of suggestions for the BBC for their upcoming documentaries. Number 1, the Kohinoor and the colonial loot. Number 2, an outdated monarchy and unhealthy obsession with the royals. Number 3, racism in 2023. We're waiting.